So I've been following the Russian hacking scandal somewhat loosely for the past month or so since the Democratic Party began venting their frustration with the turnout of the U.S. elections. And recently the U.S. government's declassified Russian hacking report has come out, and it had a good deal of conjecture, with a lot of overview omissions and a few interesting admissions. First is the opening disclaimer that the assessment only judges the events as likely or unlikely and then rates how confident they are in that guess of how likely or unlikely those claims are to be accurate. Then there was this little gem, which was probably a necessary admission after the multiple failed recount attempts, as well as relevant facts that were ignored by most because of the placement and distraction, yet had the tendency to undermine the previous point. Throughout reading the report, I was reminded of something someone once said to me: "Oh, to be a weatherman or a politician, where credibility and reliability have no purpose." After reading through the report, I went on to start researching for this video, and after a few hours of real research, I let my curiosity wander to the pundits, where I found this wonderfully bland attempt of an article by The Atlantic, a media source so even-handed that a picture of the headquarters of the DNC is their cover page on their news site, and I wanted to share it with you. The article is entitled, "Did Putin Direct Russian Hackers?" and Other Big Questions. And better than the fact that this title starts with the supposition that the hacks were in fact orchestrated and perpetrated by the Russians, beyond any level of skepticism or doubt, which even the official report would not do, as I will go on to show you, is the fact that the article appeared beside this ad. That's just precious. At the time I took this screenshot, this article by The Atlantic was, as you can see, one of the top trending articles on the subject. It was written by Kathy Gilsonen and Krishnadev Kalamer. Let's take a look at it, shall we? In a declassified version of a highly classified assessment released on Friday, January 6th, the U.S. intelligence community laid out its judgment that Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election with the specific goal of harming Hillary Clinton's electability and potential presidency. The report went on, "We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump." Alright, they're finally going to show us the evidence of how Russia attempted to hack the U.S. elections and how it led to the election of Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. Let's go ahead and get out a few pens. Its release came a day after Senator John McCain, the Arizona Republican who chairs the Senate Armed Services Committee, said at a hearing on foreign cyber threats to the United States, "Every American should be alarmed by Russia's attacks on our nation." That's right. For those of you who haven't been paying attention, this Russian hacking scandal is now being used by Arizona warhawk John McCain, who never seems to stop coming up with new and more desperate ways to stay at least somewhat relevant in American politics, as a call to heighten public sense of Russophobia, just like in the good old days of the Cold War. But I digress. U.S. intelligence officials have previously said that Russia hacked the Democratic National Committee and others in what they call an attempt to influence the U.S. presidential election. Although it's unclear if that alleged action was successful, Clapper said Thursday that there was no evidence it was. President-elect Donald Trump had been publicly skeptical of claims about Russia's role. And he has every reason to be. If Vladimir Putin wanted to influence the outcome of the U.S. elections, he would have just bribed the Clinton campaign like Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Wells Fargo. Anyway, he says it's difficult to definitely say who was behind the hacking and has supported the views of Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, that a 14-year-old could have hacked Democratic officials. After reviewing a classified version of the assessment made public on Friday, Trump issued a statement citing the cyber threat from Russia, China, and other countries outside groups and people, but emphasizing that the hacking had absolutely no effect on the outcome of the election. Last month, John McCain told Ukrainian TV Russia's actions were an act of war. He repeated those comments Thursday, but added, "It doesn't mean you go to war and start shooting." That's interesting. Why would a warhawk like John McCain consider something an act of war, but not see it as an act worthy of going to war and shooting over? Maybe it has something to do with something he said at the Senate Armed Services Committee meeting on January 5th.
During the Cold War, we had a strategy, and we had Radio Free Europe, and we had the Voice of America. Senator Graham, who will be speaking next, will attest that in our recent trip, they don't have a strategy. They don't have a counter-propaganda. The United States of America, I'm talking about. And we've got to develop that strategy, even if it encompasses the internet and social media.
So, John McCain wants a U.S. equivalent of Russian propaganda, which is to say that he's either suggesting we scale down the mainstream media to much lower levels of propaganda so that they can be equal to Russian propaganda, or he's outright calling for a new Ministry of Truth. So, let's put one of our pens in that, shall we? Anyway, back to the article. Who is involved? The assessment released Friday represents an official statement of findings intelligence officials had previously leaked to news outlets that Russian President Vladimir Putin was personally involved in cyber attacks aimed at interfering with the United States presidential election. In an interview with NPR on December 15th, U.S. President Barack Obama vowed that the U.S. would take action in response at a time and place of our own choosing. So, either President Obama was planning to respond within the next 30 days of his service, or he's saying that he plans to punish Russia after leaving office. That's interesting. Okay, pen. He went on. Mr. Putin is well aware of my feelings about this because I spoke to him directly about it. On December 29th, he did more than speak. He sanctioned 2 Russian intelligence services believed to be involved in the hacks. Russian military intelligence, the GRU, and the KGB's successor, the FSB, which is responsible for counterintelligence and internal security. He also expelled 35 Russian officials in the U.S. believed to be intelligence agents. After Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov threatened to retaliate, Putin declined to do so. In other words, when we go low, they go high, right, Hill Dog? Didn't we already know about Russia hacking the Democratic National Committee and others? Why all the fuss? The assessment purports to add on-the-record detail to both actors and intent. Prior to mid-December, Putin personally had not been blamed for the hacks resulting in leaks damaging to the Clinton campaign, though in October, Director of National Intelligence James Clapper stopped just short of doing so, saying, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. Secondly, separate intelligence leaks to the New York Times and the Washington Post on December 9th for the first time claimed that the intent of the hacking was to sway the election in favor of Trump, rather than simply sow generalized distrust. It has not yet been suggested that the cyber attacks managed to change the actual vote tally in favor of either presidential candidate. These assessments have now been made public with the imprimatur of the intelligence community. That was quick. It seems like the only information the intelligence agencies seem to want to release to the public in any sort of timely manner are the ones designed to tell us that we're being attacked and who to blame. Kind of reminds me of something. Can't put my finger on it. Anyway, information on exactly what happened has been dripping out slowly and often anonymously and unofficially for months. You know what? I'm going to read that one more time. Information on what exactly happened has been dripping out slowly and often anonymously and unofficially for months. Way back in mid-June, the Democratic National Committee reported an intrusion on its computer network, and the cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike publicly blamed Russian hackers after analyzing the breach. In July, after emails stolen from the committee appeared on WikiLeaks, Democratic members of Congress also blamed the Russians, with Clinton campaign manager Robbie Mook alleging it was the Russians who perpetrated this leak for the purpose of helping Donald Trump and hurting Hillary Clinton. Whether or not that is true, Robbie, it was the members of the Clinton campaign and even Clinton herself who took the actions that created the evidence that failed to be kept secure, which made these so-called hacks so damning. It wasn't until September that anonymous federal officials confirmed to the New York Times the intelligence community's high confidence of Russian government involvement in the hack, if not the subsequent leak, and leaving doubt as to whether the hacks were routine cyber espionage or actually intended to influence the election. And it wasn't until October that Director of National Intelligence James Clapper went on the record to blame Russia, government actors, not, say, cyber criminals who happen to be Russian. Based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, and further declaring that they were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Days later, emails stolen from Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta appeared on WikiLeaks. So as of fall, the United States government had officially blamed Russia for the hacks and stated that the hacks were intended to interfere with the American election. Oh, you mean after Trump was elected, right? We were tough and we were unaffected by these so-called attacks until we needed them for a reason to explain why Hillary Clinton didn't get elected president. Alright, put a pin in that one, and on we go. Until December 9th, intelligence officials were not claiming that the Russians wanted specifically to help Trump win, as opposed to undermining faith in the overall process. So in other words, they changed their story on December 9th on what the intent of the attacks is. Okay. Then the Washington Post disclosed a secret CIA assessment, again described by anonymous officials, declaring it quite clear that a Trump presidency was the ultimate goal of the hacks. A Times investigation published a few days later provided more background on how the hacks actually worked. Congress is planning to investigate. So Congress is going to investigate secret reports by anonymous sources. That sounds credible. Who else has been hacked? Thomas Rid, writing in Esquire. How did I not see that before? Thomas Rid, writing in Esquire in October, noted that Russia began hacking the U.S. as early as 1996, 5 years after the demise of the Soviet Union, and added that the DNC hack concealed an even bigger prize for the Russians, the National Security Agency, whose secret files were dumped this August on GitHub and other file-sharing sites. Are you saying that the National Security Agency, the NSA, a government agency spending what Janine Sahadi at CNN Money estimated in June of 2013 to be at least $10 billion in taxpayer money every year, and spies on our own citizens with their own money in the interest of so-called national security, isn't secure? You know, in the private market, companies with such low levels of competence are normally taken very seriously, and the only reason why this is tolerated is because of people's concession to the inherent inefficiency of government process. My question is, why would we trust the assessment of an intelligence agency not intelligent enough to secure their own cyber systems? Now, I'm going to skip over the part about foreign nations being hacked because it's mostly just fluff and I don't like going through all of it, just to say that Angela Merkel is apparently preparing to blame her upcoming loss in the German elections on Russian hacks as well. So let's just move on to the next part of the article, the evidence. How solid is the CIA's case that Russia tried to tilt the election for Trump? The Washington Post has cited the United States' long-standing struggle to collect reliable intelligence on President Vladimir Putin and those closest to him. Since the end of the Cold War, and especially since 9/11, American intelligence agencies have deprioritized Russia. The Post reported in fall, citing U.S. officials, that the CIA and other agencies now devote at most 10% of their budgets to Russia-related espionage, a percentage that has risen over the past 2 years, but it is still dwarfed by Cold War peak of about 40%. As for the actual evidence of intent, what's publicly available remains circumstantial, including Russian state TV pushing of Trump's candidacy, and reports that the Republican National Committee, too, was hacked, though suffered none of the same embarrassing leaks as the DNC. The RNC denied it was hacked, the Wall Street Journal reports, citing officials have been briefed on the attempted intrusion, that the effort was thwarted by the RNC's cybersecurity systems. All of this was occurring in an international political context in which Trump was one of the most pro-Russian presidential candidates in recent memory, while Vladimir Putin personally blamed Hillary Clinton for inciting protest against his rule when she was Secretary of State. Okay, colorful language aside, the circumstantial evidence you have to show that Russia was involved in the hacking of the election in favor of Trump is based on who Russia wanted to see win the U.S. presidency? Well, I won't deny Russia seemed quite happy with Trump's victory, as you can see here from footage taken in Russia when the results came out there, but that's in no way evidence that they hacked the U.S. election. So let's put a pin in that one and just move on. In tandem with Obama's announcement of sanctions against Russia on December 29th, the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI released a joint report on Russian malicious cyber activity during the U.S. election. That report, however, was short on specific evidence. Moreover, the New York Times noted it included a long list of malware that it said was evidence of Russian hacking, when some of the malware was used by non-Russian hackers. So the limited evidence you have to show Russia was involved in any malicious cyber activity is not specific and indicates other actors? Alright, let's put a pin in that one and move on. The evidence section does go on, though the new direction seems to be a meandering version of Trump denies it, so it must be true. But don't worry, I won't deny you salt miners. Meanwhile, the denials. Many of Trump's surrogates have publicly suggested that Russia was the victim of a false flag operation planned by U.S. intelligence, an assertion that doesn't appear to be based on any fact in the public realm. Except the fact that Russia hacking the U.S. election is also an assertion that doesn't appear to be based on any fact in the public realm. It's called skepticism. The same skepticism that notices that the Clinton campaign, the FBI, several U.S. intelligence agencies, and now even John McCain seem more interested in identifying and shooting the messenger than they seem in the implications of the message. Russian officials themselves have rejected the idea that they are involved, as have Russian cybersecurity experts, one of whom dismissed it as classical stereotype of the 90s and early 2000s. They say that it's virtually impossible to trace the origin of a hack. For his part, President-elect tweeted the claim of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, and that Trump's words, "The Russians did not give him the info," and that a 14-year-old could have hacked Podesta. But that's probably got something to do with Podesta's email password being password. I bet he thought it was so clever no one would ever think of it. As Kaval Waddell explained in The Atlantic, while it can be difficult to catch the culprit of a hack, it's by no means impossible. Esquire, again, how did I miss that? Esquire, in its story, noted that sloppy errors committed by the hackers pointed U.S. intelligence to their whereabouts. Andrei Soldatov, who wrote Red Web, told the Telegraph the Russian government is using its computer industry to hack its targets. "We have maybe biggest engineer community in the world, and lots of great specialists," he told the newspaper. "They are not criminals, they are professionals, and they are not bothered or afraid to refuse requests from government agencies." Does that include our government agencies, Kavan? Anyway, the article comes to a conclusion by pretending to play devil's advocate with a section title, "But Trump says we shouldn't trust the CIA because they were wrong about Iraq's WMDs. Shouldn't we take history into consideration?" Before immediately attempting to dispel the natural American skepticism triggered by the term WMD with a prepared statement from Stanford intelligence expert Amy Zegart. I'm going to call her Amy. "There's a big difference between Iraq WMD and Russian cyber hacking," wrote Amy Z, an intelligence expert at Stanford, in an email. "For starters, we're talking about different people making different assessments, a different problem to unravel, hidden nuclear capabilities in a foreign country versus cyber attacks on U.S. systems, and a different analysis process. So because of these differences, it's all good if we just blast our way into another potential international humiliation in the same way we did with WMDs, right? Intelligence analysis was thoroughly revamped after Iraq, as it should have been, but saying that these are the same people that brought us Iraq WMD is like saying this year's Golden State Warriors must be terrible because the Warriors lost so many games in the 90s. But these are the same types of people, Amy, regardless of who each individual actually is, and no one with less than 20 years of experience in the industry of intelligence services that brought us the WMD lies, advising the president or testifying before Congress. But do go on. Which isn't to say that past intelligence failures writ large have no relevance to today. The relevance is, intelligence sometimes fails. As Zegart knows, the best experts didn't predict Trump's win, and that's Americans predicting what Americans will do in an open society with frequent polling. In intelligence, adversaries are working hard and spending billions to hide their activities and deceive us. Yes, that's true. But so are our own intelligence agencies, aren't they, Amy? Are you going to sit there and pretend that our intelligence services are completely innocent when it comes to propagating lies and deceit to their own people? If you are, then let me ask you this. How good an intelligence industry can they really be? Kenneth Pollack, a former CIA analyst and Clinton National Security Council staffer, who argued for invading Iraq in 2013, said in an interview that Saddam Hussein did a totally insane version of this. Saddam's whole thinking was, I'm going to get rid of my weapons of mass destruction basically before 1995, but I can't tell my people that. I want my people to continue to fear me and believe that I have this. The U.S. and the rest of the world, frankly, all picks up on the fact that he is putting it out to all of his people that, yeah, we still have WMD, and that strikes me as a really fundamental difference. That is, wow. Good job, Captain Highsight. Where were you in March 2003? Oh yeah, that's right. Arguing for an invasion of Iraq. Totally different people, right, Amy? He continued, the intelligence community certainly could be wrong about these kinds of things, and you do want to take everything with a certain amount of skepticism. That said, it seems like in this case, they've found the tracks. That's kind of the nice thing about cyber, as best I understand it, is that you can actually go back and see the keystrokes, which is not something that we had in Iraq. Well, that's settled then, isn't it, Ken? Just pull a W and go right ahead and blame Russia for revealing criminal behavior of our presidential candidate and her staff based on limited specific evidence and associations with software non-Russian hackers are known to use. To what end? Do you want war with Russia, or are John McCain's calls for a new Ministry of Truth enough for now? Have you considered the outcome of a war with Russia? Forget who might win such a war. Let me ask you this. Do you know who would lose a war between the United States and Russia? I'll tell you. Everyone on Earth. Remember that.